Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and today's episode is anything but ordinary. We're talking about a moment in history that many think they know, but don't. A city that became a symbol of American ambition, taken not once but twice. First from the Lenape Indians, and then from the Dutch. My guest is Smithsonian Associate and returning guest, author Russell Shorto, historian, acclaimed author of The Island at the Center of the World, and now of the brilliant and surprising new book, Taking Manhattan, the Extraordinary Events That Created New York and Shaped America. In his book, Smithsonian Associate Russell Shorto writes, "Today, we are coming to appreciate more keenly than ever before the injustice America has done to the native people. The taking of Manhattan Island by the Dutch in 1626 is the very emblem of that injustice." But there is more, a lot more, to this story than conquest and colonization. This is about diplomacy, capitalism, race, identity, and a reluctant act of surrender that may have saved New York's soul. We're going deep into the records, some newly translated and made available to Smithsonian Associate Russell Shorto, that show us how a ragtag Dutch trading post became the capital of the modern world, and how a forgotten English officer, Peter Stuyvesant's iron will, and a group of free and enslaved Africans shaped the city we know today. Let's get to it. Join me in welcoming again to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series, author Russell Shorto. Russell Shorto, welcome back to the program.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. Your wonderful book, Small Time, was our conversation previously. We are talking today about your excellent new book, Taking Manhattan. I'm excited to talk to you about that, as well as your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. Let's just jump right in. Why don't you tell us just briefly what you're going to be telling us at your Smithsonian Associates presentation, and maybe how you'll be using Zoom that day, because we're all on Zoom these days.
Yeah. Well, since it's Zoom, I'll it'll be a visual presentation as well as me just talking about the subject of the book, Taking Manhattan. It is about it's about two takings, but really most of the book is about when the English took the Dutch city of New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island in 1664, and what that meant for American history. And I will be doing that with the aid of images and maps and explaining the background of both sides and the ramifications and what it meant for the world we live in today.
Well, let's talk about that for just a moment. What does it mean for the world that we live in today? Why is it important that we really kind of confront both of these takings? You talk about the Dutch and then the indigenous peoples. What's the historical weight of that today equally?
I think we are in many ways continuing to grapple with in a new way, the fact that this country built itself as a land of freedom after having dispossessed Native people of their land. And that's certainly a conundrum. And I think people are right to try to figure that out. I mean, yes, it wasn't us literally or our parents who did it, but how do we reconcile that with these notions of freedom and equality? And one of the most infamous instances of that dispossession was when the Dutch bought the island of Manhattan from the native people in 1626 for, as the saying has gone down $24. Now, I could talk for a whole hour about what that was and was not that agreement. It wasn't. To put it in context, it was not a purchase. The Dutch knew perfectly well the native people did not have a notion of real estate transfer. It was meant. They understood that from the native perspective, it would have been entering into an alliance, so that allowing them to live there, to set up a trading post so they could trade. The native people valued European manufactured goods, and the Dutch wanted furs. And so they're entering an alliance, and there was always in these alliances gifts given. And this would have been $24 or 60 guilders worth of gifts to seal the bargain. So anyway, that's one taking. Ultimately, of course, that became a taking, but it wasn't, I think, understood that way at the time. The second taking, which we can go into further, it had to do, the Dutch spent 40 years, they had a colony that encompassed not just Manhattan or New York City, but the whole region of basically 5 states, New York, New Jersey, some of Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Delaware. So it was a large colony. It was around for 40 years, and especially what they did in Manhattan and in New Amsterdam was very consequential for American history. They established the first multi-ethnic society that was undergirded by some kind of policy of tolerance or toleration. And they brought the building blocks of capitalism, which they had pioneered at the same time. And if you put those two things together, that's kind of a recipe, not just for New York, but for America.
Yeah, interesting to talk about it like that, because you write that this was more negotiation than war, this idea of dispossession. And so for our audience who's lived through the Cold War and other standoffs, is this is this one of the very first examples in our history that shows that this idea of diplomacy can be much more powerful than firepower?
I think that's one thing that it shows, and it was
Yeah.
so it builds, the story builds, and this is the way I wrote the book, as this growing confrontation between these two rivals. The Dutch and the English had just not long before fought a war against one another, and they were about to fight another one. So here they come. The English come sailing into the harbor with 4 ships and 450 soldiers and packed to the gills with gunpowder, and they anchor, and they're aiming their cannons at the fort. And in the fort at Manhattan Island, the Dutch have their cannons aimed out at them. So it seems like they're going to settle this the way they know best, these soldiers. But instead, what transpires over this 2-week period is something really interesting, in which both sides, the leaders on both sides, are weighing their options, trying to figure out it's what you do classically in a negotiation, trying to figure out, what do I want to get out of this? What do I need to get? What does the opponent need to get? What do they have that I really want? And, they ultimately come to what I call a merger in the book, rather than a true takeover.
Yeah, again, thank you for that, and congratulations on the book. The research is really impressive, and for someone like me who really did initially approach this as if it were a war rather than a negotiation, the business elements of it, kind of the transactional side of it, really kind of grabbed me, and I became very interested in that. Was there a moment in your research that really surprised you in all of this, and your understanding of how New York really began?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of moments that surprise you
Yeah.
when you're researching. Probably the main thing, the big thing, is how the extent to which this deal that they eventually worked out was just worked out by the people on the ground. So the English are in their ships, the Dutch are in the fort, and they're sending messengers back and forth on boats. And at times it's about to blow up into conflict. I've had it. We're gonna open fire, and then it calms down. And so Richard Nichols, who was the leader of the English forces, whom nobody has heard of really, uh, did this remarkable thing where he had left home. He had left London with this mandate and this, all this manpower to take this colony from their arch rival. But he kind of tore up those instructions and did something different because ultimately, Nichols started when he was still in London doing homework and trying to understand what this was, what the Dutch had created there, because people were getting the idea that New Amsterdam was kind of a special place. And he's grappling with trying to get his head around how they created this multi-ethnic society, which was unusual at the time, and made it a powerful thing, and used these elements of what we would call capitalism, even though the word didn't exist yet. And he decides, once he's in the harbor, that he doesn't just want this piece of real estate. He wants that secret sauce that this multi-ethnic community had created. So he sweetens the deal, and the Dutch keep holding out, and they're holding out because from their side, they have tried for years to get the Dutch government to support them. They've said, look, we've got this great colony, and we're doing amazing things, and we can exploit this whole continent, that's just to the west. But we need more support. And they were not getting it. So the Dutch knew that they were on their own. And Nichols knew he wanted what they had. So in a way, they both came to realize that they each wanted the same thing. And long-winded answer to your question, but your question was, what surprised me? What surprised me was that it was just this handful of people on the ground, not, leaders in the home country or anything, who effected this very novel relationship or arrangement, which allowed, basically what it did was Nichols promised they would keep everything. The Dutch would keep their homes, their families, their businesses, their trade networks that extended all over. But in exchange, it would pass to English jurisdiction. So that made New York. I mean, it made New York this place that would keep its Dutch features, which made it really special and gave it its energy and its power. And it was done by just this handful of people who thought, why don't we do it this way?
Sometimes there's just something to be said for being there, just being present, engaged.
Yeah, well, yeah. And having the King Charles II and his brother, James, the Duke of York, had appointed Nichols. And in researching him, I learned that they had known him their whole lives. They grew up together. And so this was a complicated mission. They obviously knew him very well, and they picked someone, I think, whether or not they knew what he was going to do, who could think on his feet and who could, wasn't just going to necessarily blast away and just, okay, now I've got an island, now let's build it up from scratch. But who would be able to do something creative.
Some of the materials that you used in your research are quote unquote newly translated Dutch language translations. Is that really what you're referring to? You learned all of this about King Charles and the idea of this kind of negotiation from some of those materials, and any unexpected twists come from that we just didn't understand before?
Well, the reason I wrote a book, The Island at the Center of the World, that came out 21 years ago, and that is about the Dutch colony, the whole history of this Dutch colony. And I based that work on this translation project in Albany at the New York State Library that's been going on since the 1970s. That has continued, that translation project. And in the last 4 or 5 years, the translators have gotten to the last year or two in the life of the colony when it is most robust and really, energetic. And I realized that from this latter portion of these translations, we can really see what it was the English desired, what Nichols thought was so exciting here. So that's why I wrote this book, which is just focused on this end game. And that gives the Dutch side of the story. The English side, you referenced my referencing King Charles and so on, comes from other sources. Those I went to Oxford University and the UK National Archives to kind of unearth that story, and Richard Nichols and how he fit into the English Civil War and all of that backstory to this.
We'll be back in just a moment with author and historian, Smithsonian associate Russell Shorto, talking about his new book, Taking Manhattan, the Extraordinary Events That Created New York and Shaped America. It's not just about the transfer of power, it's about the foundations of the American character. What happens when two rival empires collide, and instead of war, there's negotiation? And what does that moment in 1664 reveal about who we were and who we've become? Stay tuned for that and more with Smithsonian associate Russell Shorto coming right up. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone, Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not Old Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Smithsonian Associate Russell Shorto is our guest today. Russell Shorto has authored the wonderful new book, Taking Manhattan, the Extraordinary Events That Created New York and Shaped America. Russell Shorto will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes for more details about Russell Shorto, his new book, Taking Manhattan, as well as his upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. The book is fantastic. You, of course, have been a previous guest on our program and are just doing such great work in your writing, Russell. It's not just me saying that, too. And I really found this wonderful review of your book that I thought I'd just read so that everybody knows that the book is getting great attention. Fareed Zakaria, of course, well-known in his own right, author of the book Age of Revolution, says, in this fascinating book, Russell Shorto unravels the DNA inside New York. I thought I knew New York, but it opened my eyes to the city and its rich history. That's wonderful. I want to talk to you about one of the characters in the book that I thought I kind of knew, and that's Peter Stuyvesant. He's remembered as this brutal personality, an autocrat, but a builder, perhaps, of New York. How do we think about historical figures like him, complicated, compromised perhaps, yet really foundational in all of this process? Do we view him in an amalgam? Do we look at him as just this almost a difficult, challenging person? What's the take?
I think what you just said is the way I try to approach historical figures, as complicated as of their time. It has been fashionable in recent years and recent decades in history to focus on the dark side of our founders. And understandable, because for so long we put them on a pedestal and acted as though they were saints. I think you have to do both. I think whether we're talking about Peter Stuyvesant and figures from the 1600s or the founding fathers of a century later, I think it's important to look at, for example, those founding fathers and their relationship to slavery. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I really think, especially now, our nation is at such a fraught moment when it's more important than ever that we understand what our foundations are, what we're standing on, and what we're we hope to stand on in order to continue and build into the future, it's important to look at achievements, genuine achievements, values that we hold, that we date back to that period. And so in the case of Peter Stuyvesant, um, he he could be domineering, and he was the leader of the Dutch colony for its last 17 years. He could be this domineering force. He also learned on the job, and he reinvented his job description. When he arrived, the place was in the middle of turmoil, and he thought he could just crack the whip and get everyone in line, and then learned that his colony was comprised of these very savvy and hard-nosed traders who had trade networks that extended all over the world, and they were not going to be pushed around. And slowly, he realized that in order to make this place function, it didn't just require him to be a hard leader. It required him to become a kind of middleman between them, this community of his, and the directors of the West India Company who were in Europe and who were never going to come to America. They didn't really know what was going on here, but they were the overseers of this colony. So once he did that, then he enabled a new kind of situation in which these features of Dutch capitalism could play out in this community. And he could then encourage this multi-ethnic community, this really novel kind of business arrangement. So all of that, I think, you can put to his credit. On the other hand, he at the carrying out the instructions of the West India Company leaders, began slavery as an industry in New York. The first enslaved Africans came sort of by accident in 1627. They were on a ship, a Portuguese ship that the Dutch captured. But near the end of the Dutch period, Stuyvesant set in motion the beginnings of, slaves coming from Africa. And so you have to tally that into it too, with him and as I say, whoever it is you're focusing on in the past, as with anybody anybody in your family, they're going to have a mix of traits.
Yep, genealogy, as you write so well in Small Time. I love that book. Well, what is it about slavery in Manhattan? We don't really learn much of that in school. Why do you think that is? And what is it that we need to address about slavery beginning in Manhattan that makes this more common knowledge?
Well, why we don't learn about it, slavery in the North in general, is because for the longest time, Americans were content to think of it as this Southern problem. Slavery was a big force in New England. And in New York, I think another complication is that it's a difficult story to understand. In the 1600s, throughout the Dutch period and then beyond, they were making it up as an institution. It wasn't what we think of, the plantations, and you had these rules and laws about how slavery functioned. In the 1600s, they were making it up, and they seemed to be looking to the Bible as a model and to ancient Rome. There was slavery in ancient Rome, and also to indentured servitude. There are a number of instances in the New Netherland colony records in which one or more enslaved Africans petitions for their freedom on the grounds that they've worked enough years and they feel they should get their freedom. And they're granted it, which suggests that they're looking at indentured servitude as a model, because in a European indentured servant, you were essentially selling yourself to someone for a period of time. And at the end of that time, you got your freedom back. So that's what I mean when I say it's complicated. And you're looking at the records, there were enslaved people attended. There was one church, the Dutch Reformed Church, but different people used it. And the enslaved people worshiped there. They were married there. They baptized their children there. When they got their freedom, they were given land along with it, not out of the goodness of anyone's heart, but so that they would have a means to sustain themselves and to pay back. If they had been in the service of the West India Company, they then had to grow crops and sell them to get money to pay the company for their freedom. So it's this interesting story, which is now people are starting to write books about it, but it is complicated.
Smithsonian associate Russell Shorto is our guest today. Russell Shorto has written the wonderful new book, Taking Manhattan, The Extraordinary Events That Created New York and Shaped America. Russell Shorto has also written the bestseller, The Island at the Center of the World. We're talking today about Taking Manhattan with Russell Shorto. But as someone who's studied capitalism, again, as you mentioned, the word capitalism didn't exist so much then in New Amsterdam. What do you think some of those early traders would think about Wall Street today? They really were kind of foreshadowing some of this. Would they feel pride?
Yeah, well, I think in a way they wouldn't be surprised, because a lot of the features of, that traders, like, I don't know, in the movie Wall Street or something, you think the classic kind of traders, savvy 20th, 21st century, a lot of those elements were there right from the beginning. The Dutch had the world's first stock exchange in Amsterdam, and within a couple of years of it coming into existence, they were doing things like shorting trades and naked short selling and all these kind of clever maneuvers. At Amsterdam itself, the city was expanding rapidly, and you had people profiting on inside knowledge. They knew which way the expansion was going to go, so they bought up land and then they sold it later for a much higher profit, trading on knowledge. So all those kinds of things, which are, I guess, elements of the landscape today of capitalism, a lot of them were there at the beginning.
Russell Shorto, we so appreciate your time. Thanks for being so generous. I just have really one final question. If you could drop in on New Amsterdam today, almost on the eve of taking Manhattan between the Dutch and the British, maybe just be there for a day. Take us forward. Where would you go, and who would you want to talk to at this time?
New Amsterdam was what is now the financial district of New York. Wall Street itself was the northern boundary. So this little triangle of streets that is the financial district was this little kind of Wild West town. And I have spent so much time with a map, which you can see a replica of behind me, the Castello plan of that little town. And I would love to be able to walk those streets at that time. I mean, I've given tours and I give people photocopies of that map, and it's the same street pattern. So you can walk around, and what I just tell people is don't look up, because you'll see the skyscrapers and that ruins the effect instead of seeing these little Dutch gabled buildings. But I always think that if you could, for all the archival research that I do and that people who work in this field do, I think that if I could spend 5 minutes in the place, I would get it. I would get it in a whole other way. The feel of it, the texture of life, you would just get it, and then it would all make sense in a new way. That's really the dream, I guess.
What a pleasure it is to talk to you again, Russell Shorto. We're looking forward to your upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. Our audience will find out more in our show notes today. Russell Shorto, author of Taking Manhattan, our guest, as well as upcoming presenter at Smithsonian Associates. This is just going to be a wonderful presentation. Thanks again for your generous time. You've been a guest before. Please be a guest again. I just so enjoy talking to you, Russell.
Sure, I'm very happy to do it. I'm looking forward to the presentation, and thank you again, Paul.
My thanks to Smithsonian associate Russell Shorto for joining us today. His new book, which is excellent, is Taking Manhattan. It's a compelling read that challenges myths, fills in the silences of our history, and brings to life the early days of a city built on contradiction, ambition, and survival. To hear more stories like this and to access our full back catalog of Smithsonian Associates interviews and conversations, please visit us at notold-better.com. We're also on social media. Follow us on Twitter at notoldbetter and on Instagram at notoldbetter. for behind-the-scenes looks and show updates. This has been a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelsang. Thanks for spending time with me today. I hope you'll join me again next time for another episode of the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. And in the meantime, be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast.